In spite of the fact that it's been in the works for decades, is quantum computing finally leaving the lab? Experts, including our guest today on Tech Talk, IBM's James Wootton, are saying yes. James, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tech Talk. Is now the time to start embracing quantum computing?
Well, it's a time when we've got a great opportunity to start using the technology, and I think it's the best time to start looking at what it can do for any problems that people have that they want to solve with computers.
So what's changed? Why now?
Well, I think for me, the big revolution was in 2016 when IBM first put their devices on the cloud for people to start playing with, so these prototype devices. At the time, I was at the University of Basel, and I was a researcher working on quantum computing. And I was a theorist, so I would come up with experiments I wanted to be done, but I had no ability to do them. But finally, when they came on the cloud, I could do an experiment in an afternoon, which was crazy.
And these are experiments that are open to everyone all over the globe?
Yeah, everyone can now do
It's
things.
an open platform, so
Yeah,
to
it's
speak.
completely open and it's completely free, so anyone can sign up to an account and have a go. Of course, I had the opportunity to do it while knowing already what I wanted to do. Other people might need to get an idea of what quantum computing is first.
Yes, and that is why, and this has been one of your missions, as I understand it, is that you really want to help the public understand what quantum computing is about.
Yeah, so it's a great idea to use quantum computing as a window to quantum mechanics from one perspective. So you can use it as an educational tool, but also people need to know what quantum computing is in order to use it.
Let's back up then and tell me, if you can tell me in a headline, in a short, accessible way, what is quantum computing?
Well, it's kind of hard to answer that question in some sense because people don't know what computing is. You give it an input, it gives you an output, and then it does something in between. And
that's enough. That's good for me.
Quantum computers differ by the thing that's in between.
Okay. And what is it used for? For example, I was thinking you were saying your experiments that you put out onto the cloud. What kinds of questions were you looking to get answered?
So I work in quantum error correction, so mine was mostly looking at the device, seeing how well it works and how to make it work better.
Okay.
But quantum computing is especially efficient at encoding certain kinds of problems. This includes problems that are close to the physics of the device, such as looking at molecules and how they work, which is important for many industries. But also problems unrelated to the physics, like search problems or optimization problems that are also important across the board.
Sure. Those are things that I could wrap my head around. Optimization, search functions.
Yeah.
What else? What other real-world applications could you give me for quantum computing?
Well, in the search, everything has search. So for some of these, they're so widely applicable that it's hard to give one real-world application because searching happens everywhere. But I think, especially in what's going to be done in the first few years of quantum computers producing useful results, it's going to be things like analyzing the chemicals or doing things like high-energy physics simulations. So this will be great for, the latter will be great for CERN, for example, but the former will be great for drug companies or petroleum companies, things like that.
And there already are some commercial clients.
Yeah, so we have the IBM Q Network, which is people we work with in industry to look into what it could do for them and start preparing. Because we would estimate that in maybe a decade or more, you're going to have a point where we have very large-scale quantum computers doing useful things. And so if a revolution is coming in a decade, then you have to start preparing now.
So you would start telling CIOs of companies, now is the time to start looking into this. Yeah,
finding what problems that they do are covered by the kind of functions that we can perform in quantum computing and looking into proof of principle applications.
And what kind of reaction do you get when you do meet with, or when you do have conversations with, potential CIOs? about quantum computing? Do they look at you like, or?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of excitement, I think, when I talk to some of the technology people in companies. But also we need to communicate correctly what the scope is of quantum computing, because they might assume that it's just a fancy random number generator, which is not true. But they also might assume that it's the holy grail and can do everything, which is also not true. So you've got to make sure it's well communicated what it is that they can actually do with it.
And I assume that, businesses at the end of the day, they're going to want to know, how is this going to help us generate more income, more revenues? How is this going to help us in our business? Is there an answer for that yet, or?
Well, it's just going to provide a way of speeding things up. So if businesses have a dependence on computation, then they're relying on all sorts of tools to make sure that happens fast enough and in the right way in order to provide their product. So in the future, quantum computing will be another one of those tools, and it'll be able to be plugged into their existing software. It'll be able to speed it up. And but there's no one easy answer. You've got to look at the problems you need solving, and you've got to look at the things that quantum computing provides, and then work out how to put those together.
Are we talking about a massive investment, though, in terms of technology, hardware, software?
It's a cloud service, and we have an open source software system in which you can interact with it. So you can already start playing with the software and the simulators and the cloud hardware that we offer for free at the moment. So I think getting started doesn't require a huge investment, except in the people that you're going to put into working on it.
Who is going to pay for it? Is this something that we as consumers eventually will have to pay for, quantum computing? Is there any cost that you can foresee?
So
companies?
Yeah. So if you take maybe Amazon Web Services, this is a huge set of servers which people use for high-performance computing, and there is a cost associated with using that. And of course, if a company uses that, that cost will be passed on somehow to the consumer at the end, but it's not paid directly. And I think it will be the same business model for quantum. We'll just have our big quantum data centers, and we'll pay a subscription fee for using them.
Talk to me about, and what role will artificial intelligence play in quantum computing?
So we have artificial intelligence as one of the technologies that we're working on, and quantum computing is another large one. And there have been efforts to look into how these things can work together. And it seems that they indeed can. In fact, recently at an event we had, the winner was a project that was looking into this very question. But there's not too much concrete that we can really say about that at the moment.
Let's back up and talk about this event that you mentioned. This is the first Qiskit camp in Europe.
Yeah.
That took place in Switzerland recently. First of all, what is Qiskit?
So Qiskit is our open source.
Oh, Qiskit.
There's a debate on this.
Okay.
It's roughly 50-50, so you've got a lot of people behind you.
Okay.
But Qiskit is correct, and
well, in your camp, it's correct. All right.
Yeah.
Qiskit. Tell me what it's about.
So Qiskit is our open source software framework for using quantum computers. So when you're writing your quantum programs, you'll be writing it in Qiskit. And that's really the basis for all of our efforts to contact businesses or the public or educators. And the Qiskit Camp is a time when we bring people together and provide them with a nice location and provide them with lots of...
Which was Piz Gloria in this,
exactly.
In this circumstance, Schildhorn. Beautiful.
And provide them with people who can help out and provide them with other interesting people they can collaborate with so that they can start doing interesting things with Qiskit.
And something you mentioned to me earlier is that actually out of about roughly 150 people that were there, 100 of them or so were outside of IBM. So it wasn't just a conference for an internal one.
Yeah.
It was really people from the outside.
Yeah, we had representatives of scientific groups from across Europe. We had people from industry. We had game designers. We had an artist.
You bring up games. This is actually something that this is one of the ways, again, as I understand it, that you're trying to reach the public, right, with quantum computing is Hello Quantum, which is your game. What can you tell me about this?
We have Hello Quantum, which is an app for free, and it's just a little puzzle game, but it's based on quantum computing. So if someone does the puzzle game and they get good at it, then they can read on how they are already good at quantum programming. But we've also looked at the possibility of using games to, say, provide a nice, simple example of something happening in a quantum program. Because when you hear about quantum computing, it's often these algorithms that have been developed over the last few decades that are maybe have a little bit of complexity to them. And they're not really good for people doing their first line of code in quantum, but maybe making battleships or Snake is much more suited to that task.
Well, and I imagine you'd be quite the hit of the dinner party if you were able to master the Hello Quantum app.
Yeah, well, we had some kids come into the lab recently, and they had 15 minutes and they were given the app. And each group of kids usually got through the whole game during that 15 minutes. Adults usually aren't so great at it, but kids are really adept.
As usually happens, right?
Yeah.
Kids are much more open. And is it something that you would need a physics background to be able to do? I mean, you're saying the kids would do it, so
yeah.
Not necessarily.
Well, people with a physics background obviously have the advantage, but it depends on how far you want to get into it and what sort of applications you want to try out. So I think that there's definitely opportunities for people that have no physics background. And we've recently written a textbook, and that's been written assuming no physics background and no background of the necessary maths to be able to guide people through learning that stuff.
And what's the question that you get the most often?
I think I get the question, how does quantum programming differ from normal programming? And nowadays, the answer is that normal programming, you're used to so much high-level stuff. You add two numbers and you think that's simple, whereas in the device, that's actually quite a lot of things going on when you add two numbers. In quantum computing, you're down at a lower level. You have to do these things a bit more manually.
Okay. But the ecosystem is growing in spite of this.
Yeah, it's definitely growing, and all kinds of people are trying it out. We had some people making music and doing some speculative design by the artists in the Kiska camp.
What does that look like?
They were looking at a quantum Instagram. They were trying to imagine what something like Instagram might look like in the era of quantum computing.
And did they come up with something that you could see?
They did come up with things that you could see, yeah. So some nice animations of emojis. You're limited how much you can do in the space of a Kiska camp, but they come up with some interesting things to think about.
So what is the next step? Like, what's the next challenge in this that you are wrangling? Because that is your title. You're a qubit wrangler.
Yeah,
So...
I once put down in my job title field on a conference, qubit wrangler,
yes.
And it seems to have stuck. So wrangling the qubits is kind of a good way of describing what needs to happen over the next decade, because there are going to be imperfections in the devices that we have to work around. Mm-hmm. So when people designed algorithms, they did it assuming that there were no imperfections, and now we have to do some design of algorithms that can work around these things, can mitigate for them. So that's the challenge of the next few years.
And you will continue to tackle these challenges from Zurich, where the quantum computer sits at the IBM Research Lab.
Yeah.
And a network that also includes ETH and EPFL.
Yeah.
So it's a nationwide.
Yeah, and CERN as well is we're collaborating with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And my last question, I realize that there are few quantum computers in the world. Mm-hmm. And again, one of them is here in Zurich. Why aren't there more? I mean, are they just complex to put together or to maintain, or what makes them so rare?
Well, you have to cool them down to almost absolute zero. So they have to be in one of the coldest places in the universe in order to function correctly. Yeah. So you can't really put your qubits in your fridge. That's why they're not really going to be something that we have at home. But a lot of computing services are moving into the cloud anyway. Mm-hmm. And I think the cloud is the natural home of quantum computers. So you'll leave them in the quantum data center rather than having them in your house.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, James, for your insights and for your stories today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.